This season of This Headache Journey is sponsored by gammaCore non-invasive vagus nerve stimulator, the drug-free solution for migraine and cluster headache. gammaCore is the first and only FDA-cleared non-invasive device to treat and prevent multiple types of headache pain via the vagus nerve. It's small, handheld, and portable for quick and easy treatments whenever and wherever needed. gammaCore is safe, effective, and easy to use. Learn more at gammacore.com. That's GAMMA core.com. Hi, I'm Adam Flaherty. This is episode 2 of This Headache Journey, a podcast where I recount the many chronic headache interventions and modalities that I've tried over the past 15 years or so that you can be more informed and empowered in your headache journey. Now, I've tried many different things to combat my headaches, and I'll bet you probably have too. My feeling has always been, I'm willing to try almost anything that's recommended to me because the moment I discover something that really works for me, it'll be more than a game changer, it'll be a life changer. And just because something I've tried wasn't the magical unicorn that fixed me, that doesn't mean that it couldn't help someone immensely. And that's because all of our headaches have unique origins, qualities, and triggers. This episode is about neurofeedback for chronic headaches, and before we really get into it, I'm going to do that very podcasty thing of asking you to please subscribe to This Headache Journey on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Hark Audio, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you find this episode useful, it would mean the world to me if you left a short review on Apple Podcasts so others can learn about the show too. Lastly, please know that I am not a doctor, I'm not a medical provider, and nothing I cover here should constitute as medical advice in any way. My mother was the first one to bring up the idea of a practice called biofeedback to me a number of years ago. My mom isn't with us anymore, but she was a big advocate for me trying to discover the root causes of my headaches so I experienced less pain in my life. She was also a nurse practitioner, so I trusted her guidance on medical and health-related issues. I hadn't heard of biofeedback when she first brought it up, but my basic takeaway from her explanation was that this practice was rooted in the understanding that chronic headaches can be caused by or intensified by stress, anxiety, and trauma, which I have certainly learned to be true. From what my mom told me, though, or at least how I perceived her explanation, essentially a therapist of sorts would hold a session where they kind of dug up past traumas or tapped into things that increase your anxiety, and then they'd monitor your brain activity. And when they saw spikes, which could be connected to physical pain, they'd essentially teach you to train or condition your own brainwave patterns when something in the real world triggered those traumatic or stressful feelings so that they didn't manifest into physical pain. Again, I'm most assuredly butchering that, but that was my initial perception of biofeedback. Now, I didn't know at that time if stress or anxiety were a factor in my own daily headaches, but I figured there was no harm in looking into it. And as a side note, I can absolutely connect these things to my headaches now. I did some Googling and found that my understanding of biofeedback wasn't entirely accurate, and I also found that there were not too many practitioners near me who did this kind of work. But then I found one. Her name's Dr. Pamela Blodgett, and she was only 10 or 15 minutes away. I spent a bit of time on her website, braintrainingofnewengland.org if you're curious, and she seemed very intelligent, experienced, and passionate about her work, so I sent her an email. I scheduled a consultation with Pam, and she was a wealth of knowledge on the human brain and how training it can help with so many symptoms and disabilities and recuperation from traumatic brain injuries. And yes, for some people, it really can help with chronic headaches. But before we got into just treating me, she needed to create a brain map to understand what she was working with. She explained that physical traumas can play a huge part in this stuff and asked me if I had had any physical head or brain trauma in the past. And I've been asked that before, mostly around whether my mother had a traumatic birth with me, which she did not. And at first I said no. And then when I was challenged to dig a little bit deeper, I remembered in middle school or high school, I was goofing around on a soccer field and I jumped up and hung on to the top of a soccer goal. And the whole thing tipped over and ended up landing on the side of my head, pinning me to the ground. I know it sounds really bad. It wasn't terribly heavy, or it probably wouldn't have tipped over in the first place. And yeah, it did hurt, but I got right back up and didn't think too much of it. I had already had my chronic headaches for years before that, so I'd never really connected that event to my headaches, but Pam thought it was interesting for sure. Ultimately, she recommended a number of neurofeedback sessions, and I didn't really understand the difference between biofeedback and neurofeedback then, and I'm still not clear enough to confidently speak about the two practices, but I was absolutely going to trust her instincts. I proceeded to see Pam for a handful of sessions. She was pleasant and personable, and we talked through most of my sessions, which consisted of me sitting in a comfortable chair with a bunch of electrodes on my head, while Pam monitored my brain waves, which were visualized on a big monitor near me. There was no therapy component to it. We just chatted about our families, about work, about anything. And I don't know about you, but on days when my headaches are really bad, I can get quite sleepy, really fatigued. So sometimes I remember even nodding off when there was a lull in the conversation. It was pretty relaxing. Eventually, though, like everything I've tried, after I've invested what I feel like is significant time and money and I haven't found the results that I want, I eventually petered out with neurofeedback. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is or was the right thing to do, but after a certain period of time or a certain number of visits, I start thinking, well, this clearly isn't my unicorn, so what's next? And the more I think about what's next, the harder it is for me to justify continue making weekly or bi-weekly appointments and investing the money and the time. I have followed Pam's practice and I've always been impressed with what she's doing. She trains other practitioners, she travels the world speaking and teaching, and she seems to stay very busy with many patients at her private practice, which is in this big barn on the same property where she lives in southern Maine. It's very cool. So when I began writing this episode, I reached out to Pam to ask if she'd be interviewed about neurofeedback and biofeedback and about our time together, and thankfully she obliged. Pam can speak about all of this so much more eloquently and accurately than I'll ever be able to. So I'm genuinely excited for you to hear this conversation with Dr. Pamela Blodgett, founder of Brain Training of New England.
My name is Pam Blodgett. I have a long and interesting career working with people with disabilities and neurological differences. Master's in counseling, licensed professional counselor, state of Maine, and about to sit for the quantitative electroencephalogram exam, which would grant me a level of baseline competence in diagnosing things like seizure disorder.
Let's hear about the history of your business.
So currently I am the owner and the clinical director for Brain Training of New England, and I have just launched and purchased the domains for Brain Training International, and I've been working so far in 3 different continents, North America, South America, and Africa, where I have worked with clinical groups, including clinical psychs, therapists, medical professionals, neurologists, psychiatrists, and helping them to do mental wellness better. That is my mission, and to educate people about the prevalence of traumatic brain injury. And that means that we have to do better diagnostics in the industry itself as a whole and offer modalities that are going to get the kind of efficacy that we want.
Well, thanks for doing that work and drawing attention to that. And
You're welcome.
And I'm sure that the traveling part is exciting and taking in new cultures. And so congratulations. It's been a number of years since we did anything together, probably more than 5 years at this point.
2019. I have your file to my left.
Okay, it was 5 years then. So it's nice to see you.
Thank you.
I'm excited for the ways that your business has grown. That's really
fabulous.
Great. That's really great.
Yeah.
So for the benefit of our listeners, could you talk a little bit about specifically neurofeedback, that portion of your business? Okay. And maybe because people hear the phrase biofeedback, they hear the phrase neurofeedback. These are different things, right? So maybe could you share which of those you practice here and what makes them different from one another? I'm
actually going to give you a little history lesson. So
Wonderful.
I hope your listeners are ready. So, okay. Now imagine it's 1959. Early 60s. There are two gentlemen that are forefathers really of the biofeedback, neurofeedback industry, where people were curious. How do we, now that we're getting this computer technology available, how do we read what's happening in the brain? And what kind of conditions do you think brought us to this point? So we're talking 1854. There's a gentleman by the name of Phineas Gage working on the railroad from New Hampshire. He was using some dynamite. And one of the tamping rods, 3 feet 7 inches worth, that dynamite didn't quite work out right. I guess there was not enough sand put in the little space where he was supposed to blow up to make room for the railroad ties. And that tamping rod went under his left cheekbone and then out the top of his head. This is in 1854. And so he ended up living. He is called one of our the reasons why we even have neuroscience to this day. So remember that date, 1854. So we got to study this heretofore amiable, friendly dude working on the railroad. Everybody loved Phineas Gage. He's in his 20s. So now he has this giant metal rod that goes under his left cheekbone. This is important from a brain perspective, and up out the top of his head. And he lived, but he did go into a coma because of brain swelling. All right, this is a thing that we'll revisit in this conversation over and over again. So he goes to the hospital and they get to study him and live. They treated him. He survived. He lived another 10 years, but he changed. And this is where we started to study the brain. This is, again, the beginning of neuroscience. What happened to poor Phineas? Well, he became surly, swearing. His personality changed. And that's after that point, in the mid-1800s, we started to look at globally, what happens to somebody when they've got a head boo-boo? What happens when they have a serious head trauma or they have a seizure disorder? So we studied him. He ended up passing away in California at his mom's home from what's called status epilepticus, means he couldn't stop having seizures. And that is a response of the brain from severe inflammation and injury.
How long after the accident? 10 years later. Okay.
10 years later, he died. But in the meantime, he wasn't able to work on the railroad anymore, but he went to Chile and did sort of a carny program, taking his tamping rod and telling him he no longer had a left eyeball. And it's just interesting what we learned from him. Okay, so now fast forward about 90 years, and we have Barry Sturman working in Los Angeles. We have Joe Camilla working in Chicago. And these folks are some of the entry-level people who are studying the brain. Why? Because for a long time, people have had seizures. They've had head injuries. People have fallen on their heads. This is not exactly a brand new phenomenon in 2024. So these guys were working with cats with the goal of figuring out why people have seizure and how do we stop it? How do we fix the problem? So Joe Camilla in Chicago, he's working with kitty cats, and we have Joe Camilla in Los Angeles. Actually, both of these gentlemen not long ago passed away. So this is still current history that we're learning. So you figure 1960, let's make an even year. That's only 64 years that we have been actually studying and applying neuroscience. That's when you say neurofeedback, let's say applied neuroscience, because that's what we're doing. Okay, so he's working with kitty cats. He has, let's just say for ease of a number, he's worked with 30 kitty cats to get them out of having seizures, and he's training them in something called sensory motor rhythm, because our brain is an electrical unit. We produce electricity coming off about 16 inches from our head.
Oh my gosh.
And so when we are doing neurofeedback, we're using electrodes on the head. We're doing computer-brain interface to entrain the brain to make better electrical signals that are balanced and regulated throughout the brain. And he found, lo and behold, when they trained the brain in this electrical signal pattern, it's 12 to 15 hertz. That's a speed of the wave. When he entrained them, those kitty cats were able to have fewer seizures. He published this research in a magazine called The Brain, I believe, and NASA read that article. They call him up, NASA as in astronauts and going into space.
Yeah.
So they call Barry and say, yo, dude, this is a really exciting information working with these kitty cats. Hey, what do you think could happen if you did that with adults? He's like, I don't know. He said, well, here's our little problem, NASA says. We have human subjects we want to send up into space. Remember the year, 1959, 60, right? They want to go up into space. And every time the astronauts are exposed to jet fuel, they have seizure. This is a problem, right? So Barry says, well, I don't know. I'm not going to try with humans, but I'll give it a whirl with the kitty cats. So NASA sends him some of that jet fuel. He used a control group. And he used the kitty cats that have been trained in sensory motor rhythm, that 12 to 15 hertz signal that at the top of our heads, we know is a good, steady, solid rhythm for function. That means we can toggle well at the top of our head between paying attention and relaxation, and also balanced from right to left. That is, again, the goal of neurofeedback is to entrain the brain to be well regulated. That's what neurotherapists do. We help the brain to be symmetrical and regulated and dynamic. Okay. Neurooptimization is always my goal. I want that brain to be balanced and be delved, right? I want it to be flexible. So Barry Sturman exposes the kitty cats that are the control group, meaning that they've had no training, and the kitty cats that have had sensory motor rhythm training. Guess what happened?
The ones that were exposed, were having...
The kitty cats that had been trained in sensory motor rhythm, meaning they had a better regulated brain, did not have seizures. They did not have seizures when they were exposed to the jet fuel.
Yeah.
The control group, the kitty cats with no training, had the response like those, astronauts they wanted to put into space.
Yeah.
They had seizures. So they experimented with human subjects and trained them in sensory motor rhythm before exposing them to the jet fuel. And what happened? Their brain was able to cope with the jet fuel exposure. And fast forward to 2024 today, we still train our astronauts before going into any kind of space activity with neurofeedback to ensure that the brains are optimally flexible, durable, and responsive. How cool is that?
Fascinating.
Isn't that interesting?
It's absolutely fascinating. So how is that different from what biofeedback is?
Okay. Biofeedback. So let's back up a little bit and just have a person come in off the street. I have some files and I have a wall of brains. What I'm encouraging people to do through my Brain Training International project is to train up therapists and medical group to do better diagnostics. And one of the things that we know that we can use, there are three basic ways that we can measure what's happening in the brain. One is a quantitative electroencephalogram. One is a SPECT study like Dr. Amen uses with a contrast dye. And then the other one is an fMRI. fMRIs and SPECT studies are quite expensive, like 10 grand and over. A quantitative electroencephalogram is anywhere between $500 and $1,000, sort of industry standard across the United States. Neurofeedback providers like me, when a client comes in, we first do an intake. That usually takes about an hour to find out medical history. And I am looking very closely at what is the traumatic brain injury history. And what I have discovered through the research I'm looking at is about 60% of people who walk into any kind of therapy practice who have symptoms, neurosymptoms, have a history of traumatic brain injury. Something. They may have forgotten about it. They may have not talked to their mother and said, about that car accident when I was 4. Tell me about that. They say, oh yeah, you hit the windshield, right? And so when a client walks in or when I do that intake and they describe to me symptoms, I can predict with pretty good accuracy what part of the brain is injured. When I was looking at your report, it looked like you said you had a soccer field head to the ground injury.
I do, yeah. I do have that. I was hanging on a soccer goal as maybe a 12 or 13-year-old, and it just sort of like came down and whacked me. And I really have almost never, it probably hasn't even crossed my mind since I told you that more than 5 years ago.
So that would cause symptoms. So when we are injured, we're going to have symptoms. So if someone comes to me, for example, a stroke client, and they say, I have word retrieval problems, I know that a site of the stroke was left-sided because that is the part of the brain that is responsible for reading and writing and word finding. If they say they have emotional regulation problems, I'll know that that's a right-sided issue. If they have fallen out of an airplane, true story, they've fallen out of an airplane and onto the top of their head, they may have some motor function. That is the motor strip at the tippity top of our head. So again, each area of the brain has a job, a responsibility. And the reason why I do at the second session, I see someone and I'm holding up a nice little map. It's a 5-page report that I do. And I'm going to have head maps. I'm going to have little colored red, blue, yellow, pink, green maps that like the size of the head showing where the noses and the ears are. And that's going to show me which area of the brain is dysregulated. That guides my treatment.
And so does that incident that I shared with you align with what you saw on my brain map?
So here's a couple of things. When for example, and you have kind of very traditional, I thought this was a decent map to talk about. Not only is it personal to you and critical to you, but also a lot of listeners might have some similar problems. You have some sleep apnea, and I will pick up when a person starts falling asleep. There's a 300-second marker, for example. If someone is falling asleep in that chair prior to the 300-second mark, we suspect that person has some insomnia or potentially sleep apnea, and I will send you out for a sleep study. There is definitely some dysregulation centrally for you and some what I would call aberrant activity at the back of your head. So I think the back of your head was impacted in some kind of injury in some way that would give you both some visual processing problems and potentially be the source of your headaches.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. In your case, we see really significant. It's about what I would call 3 to 4 standard deviations from mean. That's real mathy. It means you're outside the norm for functioning at the back of your head. And this to me looks like the source of your headache is a back of the head problem. So that guides my treatment. So if you were to, come back in and do, try some of my newer equipment that I have, some of the buzzwords in the field are amplitude training, a low energy system. There is biofeedback systems that's measuring your biometric markers like a heart rate variability, your sweat index, how good your blood flow is to your hands, because we want to have good blood flow. And I also am looking at that head map to see where the dysregulation is so that you can get regulated as quickly as you can and frankly be in and out of my office and go live a happy life and come back and visit me and bring me a chai. Oat milk. Please.
I'm sorry I didn't offer to bring you a chai on my way here. It didn't even cross my mind. I should have done that. Would have been a nice thing to do.
Next time.
So we met for, you said 8 sessions is what you have on record.
Yes.
And but typically you would recommend more sessions than that.
I recommend because of the nature of who finds me. So typically anyone with a neurological dysregulation is going to be seeking, how do I fix this problem? So they may go to their PCP, or maybe they've been in an accident. They might go to a neurologist. And unfortunately, where our industry is currently is you go in, you get your 11 minutes of an appointment, And they may do an MRI, they may do a CT scan, just depends on your presentation. They may do some diagnostic, but in the case of an MRI, the neurologist might say, oh, there's all 4 lobes are there. There's no brain bleed. I don't see that you've had a stroke. You're good. And the client may say, not good. Actually not good. I'm fighting with my wife. I'm yelling at my dog. I feel impatient with my coworkers. I'm not sleeping well. I can't regulate my diet very well. I'm not motivated. On and on and on with all of the symptom picture. Headaches is another common presentation. It is one of the many symptoms that people walk in here with, including seizure or a known stroke, for example. So when an MRI comes out clean and there's nothing they can do about that, they may recommend a PCP or a neurologist. They may say, I can give you a stimulant to help you with attention and focus, or I can give you some pain relieving medication, or how's your mood? They may assess. Now that's based on a more, the last 75 years of doing mental wellness. I'm being generous with that word, where they may give you some kind of big pharma product, but that's a Band-Aid. It's not a fix.
It's treating the symptom, not treating the root cause. Yeah.
Correct. So my goal is to support the industry in its growth in neuroscience and in neurofeedback and biofeedback. That neuro and bio are one of the measures that, if you listen to people like Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score, he talks about trauma people. So that was his specialty. The same with Seaburn Fisher, who is in Northampton, Massachusetts. She's written a book, which actually I can pull right off my shelf, Neurofeedback in the Treatment of Developmental Trauma. This is a different type of population that would come in. So this would be a childhood trauma, and you can read about her work. But Bessel did a lot of work with severe childhood trauma. He found that the only 3 things that got to the inner limbic system, the inner part of the brain, not so much the periphery, like a boo-boo might give you, but that inner limbic system, the part that is control of fight, flight, and freeze, that gets imprinted when we're little. And let's say you've been sexually violated, or you've grown up in a family of neglect, or you're a child survivor of war. Severe things. But also it can happen in severe poverty. Think of some of our children alive today. They don't have enough food. So if you are constantly in that fight, flight, and freeze state, that limbic system, the amygdala, can be hijacked so that dysfunctioning behavior carries on into adulthood. And then adults may come into a practice like mine or any mental health practice seeking help, seeking regulation. They may not know that word, but that's what they're looking for. I want to be regulated. I want to manage my emotions. I want to make better life choices. So what Bessel found was there are 3 things that get to an amygdala hijacked brain: neurofeedback, psychedelics, and EMDR. And when I present and when I talk about this subject of neuroscience, applied neuroscience, those are the 3 things that we know at this time, 2024, that are really making an effect on that limbic system being able to get more cool, calm, and collected. Therefore, that person's able to make better choices.
And EMDR is not something that I have pursued, but that is, you can speak more to it than I can, but that's sort of an intense behavioral therapy.
It's an eye movement redirection therapy. And so a person takes a specific training in it. I do not have that credential. I'm not seeking it, but there are many folks in the therapeutic community that have learned EMDR, just like I'm teaching people as we speak about neurofeedback and helping people who come into me and they are already, a master's in social work, or they are already an MD potentially. The folks I'm working with down in Mexico, in Oaxaca, these are already psychiatrists and medical doctors that want to apply neurofeedback to their clinical practice because they know they're not getting the efficacy they want. Talk therapy and even medication therapy is still only hovering around the 30% mark in terms of efficacy. That's not a great track record. You add something like EMDR or neurofeedback into your repertoire, guess what our statistical efficacy rate jumps up to? 65%.
Wow.
That's significant. That's what I want, right? And that's what led me to making a big career shift 12 years ago.
What about somebody who's listening to this and saying to themselves, well, I didn't have a traumatic upbringing. I was not abused. I can't think of any traumatic injuries. I don't have any of the behavioral symptoms that you've described. I just have these tension type headaches or these cluster headaches or migraine. Is there value in those people exploring neurofeedback?
Right. And you're a headache guy. So, I think this is important, whether it's a frontal lobe executive function and planning problem, whether it's a seizure problem, whether it's an injury to left or right, that one of the other issues they may have is a headache, but it's one of the symptoms. And often there's a whole lot of other stuff going on with it.
It does almost seem like, you said what you're doing is not magic, right? But it does almost seem like magic when you sit in a chair with electrodes on your head and you're not doing anything. You
might be playing a game. Typically what I'll do is I have some fun, like a Pac-Man game where you're sending a spaceship through a ring. When you're regulated well, that spaceship goes cleanly through the ring and gets 100 points. When you are not quite regulated, you may either go Wah, and you go outside of the zone and the computer will go bong versus ding, 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 ding. So, you're getting an operant conditioning experience, training your brain like a little, Pavlovian dog, into your brain, making it a good, healthy pattern. And when it makes a healthy pattern, you're going to reduce your symptoms.
But for adults, if my memory serves me correctly, when I was sitting there, we were just having conversations, about whatever, our personal lives, swapping stories.
But at the same time, yes. And that was because I was using a low energy device.
Yeah.
And when people come in with headaches or a severe brain injury and can't stand to have lights in the room, I probably had the room quite dim. I had the lights turned down, and I do have a device. It's a high performance neurofeedback device. Some people use Lens. That's another low energy device. And, you don't have to have the screen on. It really depends on your brain map and kind of what my treatment options are. And in most cases, I'd say 85% of the time, people come in and I'm only using 3 to 5 electrodes.
Okay.
With a little bit of sticky paste.
Okay.
So I would love to do that for you. Come
Sure.
on in. Yeah, well,
Sure.
I'll give you a free session.
So I just wonder, are those electrodes only collecting information?
They're only reading the electricity coming off of your scalp, and they are rewarding you. Let's say we're training sensory motor rhythm, that 12 to 15 hertz I referenced for the kitty cats, right? To help the brain at the top of the head get regulated well. So I put those electrodes, and it is reading whether or not, and if I'm training that sensory motor rhythm, which I frequently do, let's say if you're only making an 8 to 11 hertz signal, that means you're drowsy or sleepy, you will not get a beep, beep or a ding, ding. And that airplane is going to go outside of phase.
Okay.
Or some clinicians, they have a screen with a dimmer. So they might put like a kids program on, like Aquanauts, if you have a 4-year-old client, right? Oh, you're smiling. You know
I'm
Aquanauts?
aware of it. My girls didn't watch that in particular, but I'm aware of it.
Bluey, maybe?
Yeah, we're big Bluey people.
Bluey people. Okay, my granddaughters are Bluey people. So you would put electrodes on the head and they would be watching Bluey. And if they were out of phase, the screen would go dim and kind of like opaque. And so when they're in the right phase, all of a sudden that show is going to be very clear to them. So their brain wants that show to be clear. And so that is their reward for staying in phase.
Okay.
Is that helpful in explaining?
Yeah, because
the training
that
aspect
is
of it?
I remember before I met you and came in and did the brain map and begun doing some sessions, my assumption was that I would have these electrodes on that were collecting information, presenting them on a screen, which did happen, but that at the same time, you would be asking me triggering questions, which would incite some kind of anxiety or stress, and then somehow
not in this case, and that is not common. Now, I can't say that people wouldn't be using neurofeedback for various kinds of training that would include some kind of an immersive experience, right? Such as a veteran maybe trying to work through their trauma exposure therapy. But that is not my specialty. And so I don't offer that. I do offer, biofeedback, somatic therapies, infraslow frequency training that's really good at getting to the limbic system. So the infraslow frequency training is pretty common now, and that is working with a very low and slow vibratory hertz signal. And the kind of neurofeedback you did is that you are taking in some kind of energy. The machine, the computer in your brain are having a little game, a little conversation. And so you're exposed to 2.5 picowatts of energy, which is the equivalent of keeping a AA battery in your pocket.
Okay.
Probably for most of us, or we all are carrying around something that's giving off some energy.
Sure.
Our phone in our pocket almost every day. So you're exposed to about that much energy, but that is enough to help the brain to regulate. But again, in your case where you did 8 sessions, I typically say, okay, I would like to do a 20-session run with you. Don't be looking for anything too exciting until we get to about session 10. That's usually my marker. And so, but at that point, I put my, good Sherlock Holmes hat on because I want to know, okay, if I need to sleuth out, or do we need to send you out for a functional medicine evaluation? Should you be doing, like in your case, hyperbaric oxygen, HBOT? Or I might send them for a neurotransmitter test to look at where their own neurotransmitters are. It really is case by case. And I did write some notes down of the community of medical folks that I collaborate with, an upper cervical chiropractor. Mm-hmm. I work with them, and we send back and forth clients. And I know you've also worked with Dr. Amy Brzezinski,
yes,
who's a neurological optometrist.
Visual victory training, right?
Mm-hmm. And so when someone has a back of the head injury, and I know that they are going to have a visual processing issue typically, and possibly headaches from that injury spot, I often send them to Dr. Amy or to a neurological optometrist in the area, because that is the area where our visual information is coming in our eyeballs and processing. And that is often a person who has an injury at the back of the head gets very fatigued. They often have a sleep issue, and they are not processing visual information at the same speed. Instead of just think about electricity moving through water, it's more like, that electrical pattern is moving through mashed potatoes with chunks of garlic in it. That's not fast and fun. And if you're a kid and you're trying to look at a board and get that information in, you're going to want to rule out, especially in my case, that's a processing issue that can be corrected with different size lenses or different kinds of exercises.
Sure.
All of those things, in addition to talking about diet, exercise, and sleep hygiene, which is a big problem with our teenagers, you've got to have a whole approach to the client, right? It's not just, oh, you have a headache, I'm going to come in, throw some electrodes on, call it a day. It's it needs to be diagnostically determined where to train you best. It needs to be determined, are you sleeping? Are you eating? If a client comes in, this will be of no surprise really to anyone, but especially the therapeutic community. If a client comes in and they've been sleeping in their car for a week, let's postpone therapy until you have a home to live in, until I know you're eating 3 meals a day, until I know you are in a safe place for sleep. Maslow's hierarchy of need, food, shelter, clothing, you got to get those checked off first. And then you can start addressing the more nuance of, are you exercising? How's your social group? Are you living in a home with violence? These are big, big, big questions. And you couldn't see my shrug. Just knowing that there are big problems people are facing. And if they're about to be evicted, or they can't pay their mortgage, or they're about to file bankruptcy, these are real life stressors that have to be managed and addressed. Again, I'm not a fairy. So I'm aware when people walk in, you're a whole package. You got all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And the realization that I've come to over the last 15, 20 years is that there's not the magical cure for me, and that there are multiple things contributing to my
Ah, the
headaches.
unicorn.
Right, exactly. Yes,
Listen
we've
to your
used
other
that. We've
podcast.
used that phrase, right? But because of you, I did try the hyperbaric chamber, and I did connect with Dr. Brzezinski, and that's why I'm wearing these glasses now. Actually, an interesting side note to that: what she found, and has been validated by an optometrist, where I just go for my annual exam, is that my close proximity vision is good and my distance vision is good, but where my eyes falter is the ability to refocus between different depths, visual focal lengths.
And that would be consistent with your brain map that shows, a significant dysregulation at the back of your head. Now, I can't tell you where that injury came from or where that dysregulation came from, but 4 standard deviations from mean is pretty significant.
Well, this inspires me to want to get back into it with you. And cool. That sort of is a great way to kind of wrap this up just by saying, you've suggested for most people, you would recommend maybe 20 sessions.
Yeah, as a baseline.
And that, headache may be part of what they're experiencing, but typically there's other symptoms too that you're kind of working to reduce, regulate, get under some kind of control.
Anxiety, depression, sleep problems, attention and focus issues. Yes, though that's all part of brain. So what I tell people is, whatever brain junk you've got going on, neurofeedback can address it. And this is going to be a very exciting field to watch.
A big thing that those of us who deal with chronic headaches of any type have to think about is, where am I going to put,
or chronic pain, I would add.
Sure. Any kind of chronic
dimension.
Pain. If I'm addressing that pain and trying to reduce it, where am I going to put my time and my money, and for how long am I going to dedicate, time to this particular practice? And for me, that I guess was 8 sessions. And then I don't know if I was distracted by the next shiny object that I wanted to pursue or what.
Frontal lobe.
Yeah,
that's a frontal lobe issue.
Yeah. But I would say, in my experience, it wasn't the magic unicorn, but I also didn't give it enough time. And I would recommend that anybody do some research on neurofeedback, biofeedback, the brain, and how that could be impacting your headaches. I think it's absolutely worth discussing with your neurologist or PCP, reaching out to someone like Pam or someone on the website that she shared earlier, which is going to be in the show notes, and exploring it and seeing if it could be useful for you.
And there are, as Brain Training International expands, I do reference other clinicians. I trained an intern. Actually, it was during 2019 and 2021 that I had an intern that I found in 2017 who I met in Cusco, Peru, who's now building out practices in both Cusco and Lima, Peru. So he's referenced on there. I have the somatic therapist, and I have maybe 12 different therapists who are on that site that I have trained.
Where can people learn more about Brain Training Center of New England, Brain Training International? Can you tell us your website and anywhere else where they can learn about you and your practice?
Sure. So I'm braintraininginternational.com. I'm Brain Training of New England. You can email me at gmail.com. You can go to braintrainingofnewengland.org. You'll find me.
Well, thank you, Pam, for sharing your knowledge, your experience with us. And I hope that listeners find this conversation useful and will continue to explore the brain and neurofeedback as part of their headache journey.
Awesome. Wear a helmet.
Always wear a helmet.
Thanks, Adam.
In reflecting on my time with Pam, I'm glad I tried neurofeedback. It wasn't the magical unicorn I'd hoped it would be, but I've come to understand that the unicorn probably doesn't exist, and that there are likely a number of factors which contribute to the frequency and the intensity of my headaches. So it's finding the right interventions and then doing them at the right cadence that will likely garner the best results for me. It may be the same with you, it may not. But like Pam said, this brain stuff is kind of a long game, and neurofeedback is a practice that I might return to. So what do you think? Does this episode make you want to bring the idea of neurofeedback or biofeedback up with your PCP or your neurologist or headache specialist? Do you feel like it's worth looking into further as a possible treatment for your chronic headaches? Please let me know by leaving a review of this headache journey on Apple Podcasts. In the next episode, I'll be recounting my experience with a procedure called sphenocath. Subscribe now so you'll be notified when that episode drops. A special thanks to GammaCore, the non-invasive vagus nerve stimulator, for sponsoring the first season of the podcast. My name is Adam Flaherty, and I want to thank you for joining me on this headache journey.